sharing your heart. Bless you. I don't want to speak for about 15 minutes today, maybe 20 or 30, 15. I want to introduce you to one of my favorite biblical characters, a man named Solomon. I kind of connect or relate to Solomon on a number of different fronts, a number of different levels. His story is found in the Old Testament, 1 Kings chapter 1 to 11. And then you can read the diary of his life in the book of Ecclesiastes. The word Ecclesiastes means preacher. I call Ecclesiastes the preacher book. Reading the Bible, one of the first things we note about Solomon is he had a bit of a difficult family life. In fact, I would call his family life the den of dysfunction. Solomon's father, King David, he was a womanizer. He was an adulterer. He was a murderer. And at times he was an abuser of power. And his mother, she too was an adulterer. Tough environment to grow up in. Relationships were also difficult for Solomon. He had a number of power-hungry half-brothers. And one half-brother in particular tried to prevent him or get in the way of Solomon actually inheriting the throne of becoming king. Also noteworthy of Solomon's life, chapter 3 of 1 Kings, now king of Israel, he has a dream. And in that dream, he himself, God, grants Solomon the gift of wisdom, so much so that he now is the wisest man in the then known world. And for good measure, in that dream, God happened to say, by the way, Solomon, I'll make you the richest cat in the land. We're not told exactly where, when, or how. We're really not. But somewhere in the first 11 chapters of 1 King, Solomon's dysfunctional mess, the dysfunctional mess in his home of origin and the dysfunctional mess in his own life, his tremendous intellectual gifts and his financial success, they all collide, they all come together. I mean, Solomon has all of this stuff, yet somehow, some way, he's left wanting. Something is missing. There's a void. There's an emptiness deep within him. Every morning, Solomon wakes up with this nagging question. Is this all there is? Every morning, Solomon wakes up with this question. His words, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, meaningless. Everything under the sun, everything here on earth, it's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. So plagued with this inner emptiness, Solomon is determined to fill the hole. He's determined to find meaning and purpose in this life. So he tries a number of things. Number of things to fill this empty space, this hole in his heart. In the preacher book, chapter 2, Solomon decides that he might find that fullness in his heart if he becomes a hedonist. Pleasure at all costs. No holes barred. Just explore everything I can. Have as much fun as I possibly can. He tries to fill the void in his life with laughter. Much laughter, the Bible says. Fun trips. Fun parties. Indeed, if you read the book, you'll know that Solomon was a party-hardy kind of guy. He looked for satisfaction in wine, in an abundance of wine. He drank enough wine every day to try and make himself happy, to no avail. He looked for meaning and purpose in life in his accomplishments. He spent years, 13 years, John, can you imagine? 13 years to build his house. 20 years to build the house of God. He thought when all was said and done, he could look back at his building feats and be satisfied. He was not. Solomon planted and developed the largest vineyards in the world, the largest gardens in the world. He had them planted by those that worked for him. He built parks as far as the eye could see, and he filled them with the most exotic fruit trees the world had ever known. He planted vast orchards, and he designed and built some of the first irrigation systems in the world so that these orchards would actually flourish in the punishing heat of the eastern sun. Solomon had it all. Hundreds and thousands of servants tending to even the smallest of needs. He had more herds and flocks than any in Jerusalem. He was the largest rancher known to man. Silver and gold, oil barons and sheiks of the modern world could not hold a candle to his riches. Entertainment. He did not fly to Broadway to be entertained. He built his own Broadway in Jerusalem. He had his own theater company, hundreds and thousands of men and women playing and singing songs written just for him. He had fame. He tried to fill the hole in his heart by impressing others with his fame. He had royalty from other countries, the Queen of Sheba, not to name the least, come to visit him, bowing down, paying honor to him. And he hoped that just as people would honor him, that might just fill him up and he would feel significant in life. Did not. And if that's not enough, Solomon had 1,000 women that he could call upon at any time, a different woman, 365 days a year for 3 years, without seeing the same women or woman, to satiate all of his needs. Solomon had it all. Money, wine, women, and song. Yet at the end of his life, he continued to make this stunning statement. Meaningless, meaningless. Everything under the sun, everything here below the sun on earth, the things that we can see, they're meaningless. They're powerless to satisfy the empty space in his heart, in our hearts. The answer to Solomon's dilemma, to his emptiness, is found in the same preacher book. In chapter 12, Solomon says this: now the conclusion of the matter is this. In other words, the way to fill the emptiness we all experience in life, the secret, he says, is found in verse 13. Fear God and keep all of his commandments. Fear here isn't be terrorized by God. The word fear is respect. Respect God and keep his commands. Solomon is saying this. He's saying, for most of my life, I looked for meaning and purpose in life under the sun, in earthly things, earthly endeavors, earthly pursuits, earthly relationships, earthly stuff. But meaning and purpose in life, it eluded me. Now that I'm older, I clearly see, Solomon says, that meaning and purpose in life, my emptiness can only be satisfied by respecting and related to someone above the sun, not under the sun. Solomon is saying that there's this God-shaped void in each human heart. You and I can try and stuff a number of earthly things into that void, but nothing on earth fits. It's reserved for Christ and Christ alone. Void is reserved for a respectful relationship with the God of the universe. I've been there, and I suspect you've been there. I've taken that journey through life, desperately looking to find meaning and purpose. I suspect that many of you have taken that journey. I think we've all spent time on the highway of emptiness. I look forward in athletic pursuits. If I could just make this particular lacrosse team or hockey team, I would be complete. It would be enough for me. Drugs and alcohol. Drinking and drugging myself, somehow believing that my disillusionment with life would slip and slide away. Money, stuff. If I could just have enough dough, I'd be happy. Women, my younger years, confusing lust with love. They're not the same, you know. Somehow, if there were enough women that would just tell me how great I was, I would feel whole. The age of 23, I thought life was over. I had just lied at the psychiatric institute I was in after 12 shock treatments. I promised to come back on an outpatient basis if they would just let me go. I never went back. Depressed out of my mind, I had a Baptist preacher I met come to see me. And this is what he said. He had a Bible with him, and he said, "Greg, what has God got to allow to happen in your life before you begin to look above the sun for answers rather than underneath the sun?" He gave me the Bible and he walked away. I had a bit of time on my hands back in those days. So I picked up the Bible and I read it in 7 days. Not because I was smart. I just had time on my hands. And I found a loving God who, when asked, filled that God-shaped void in my heart, reserved for him and him alone. My wife, Joanna, and I, we have a son who lives in Saskatoon. He's probably one of the most entrepreneurial kids I know. Not just because he's our kid. I asked him how at times he's become successful in his life. He said, "Greg, it's very simple. Early on, I just decided to do this. If I wanted something, I would just ask. I would just ask." He wants to write a book and he wants to entitle the book "Just Ask." See, the promise of God filling that God-shaped void in my heart, it's just not for me. It's just not for Diane. It's for you too. You just have to ask. You just have to ask. I'm going to pray, and Chris, you can come up and close. Lord, thank you for our time together. We love you, Jesus. Thank you so much for Diane and the way you've moved in her life. We're so grateful. Pray these things in your name.